And I would think about this, because I'll tell you what it is that you need to do to be successful. Some of these things aren't so malleable, but others are things that you can work on. Well, IQ, well, that's a rough one, because there's no evidence, as far as I can tell, that you can do a damn thing about your IQ. I was just reading a paper by Dan Simon today. It's a relatively recent review. Dan Simon did the invisible gorilla stuff, and he was looking, because there's all these companies that claim that these online brain training exercises can produce cognitive improvements, and he reviewed the literature again, and I've reviewed that literature like 6 times in the last 15 years, because I keep hoping that someone will crack the problem, but it's always the same answer. It's like, you do brain training games, you get better at the game, a lot better at that game. You get slightly better at similar games, but distal games that are still heavily cognitively loaded doesn't affect your performance at all. Zero, none. So the issue of how to raise IQ, man, that's a killer. No one knows how to do it. I can tell you how to stop your IQ from decreasing as you get older. That's not so bad, because it does that. Fluid IQ decreases from the time you're 20 and pretty rapidly. It's physical health is the best preventative. So exercise, physical exercise. Weirdly enough, you think, well, why? Well, your brain uses oxygen like mad, right? And it needs to be kept clean and well oxygenated. And physical exercise, both like weightlifting, so anaerobic and aerobic exercise both seem to be very, very effective at staving off cognitive declines across the lifespan. So that's a really useful thing to know, because that's the only thing we know that does that. So then the next best predictor of lifetime success is conscientiousness. Well, so, and of the 2 aspects of conscientiousness, say orderliness and industriousness, the better predictor is industriousness. So the question is, well, what can you do about your industriousness? And the answer to that is, well, that's kind of rough too, because there's a strong genetic component. But you can work on micro habits with regards to your conscientiousness. And I think the best micro habits, this is partly to do with this future authoring program processes, I think the best thing you can do with regards to your conscientiousness is to set up some aims for yourself, goals that you actually value. And the future authoring program helps people do that. And basically, it does a situational analysis it helps you do a situational analysis of your life more than a psychological analysis, I would say. And so the questions are something like, well, all right, you're going to have to put some effort into your life. And you need to be motivated to do that. And so what are the potential sources of motivation? Well, you could think about them in the big 5 manner. If you're extroverted, you want friends. If you're agreeable, you want an intimate relationship. If you're disagreeable, you want to win competitions. If you're open, you want to engage in creative activity. If you're high in neuroticism, you want security. Okay, so those are all sources of potential motivation that you could draw on, that you could tailor to your own, your own personality. But then there are dimensions that you want to consider your life across. And so we ask people about, well, if you could have your life the way you wanted it in 3 to 5 years, if you were taking care of yourself properly, what would you want from your friendships? What would you want from your intimate relationship? How would you like to structure your family? What do you want for your career? Well, how are you going to use your time outside of your job? And how are you going to regulate your mental and physical health, and maybe also your drug and alcohol use? Because that's a good place to auger down, because alcoholism, for example, wipes out 5 to 10% of people. So you want to keep that under control. And then so maybe you develop a vision of what you would like your life to be, and that associates the goal. Once the goal is established, and then you break down the goal into micro processes that you can implement, the micro processes become rewarding in proportion, in relation to their causal association with the goal, and that tangles in your incentive reward system. We talked about the dopaminergic incentive reward system, and that's the thing that keeps you moving forward. And the way it works is that it works better if it produces positive emotion when it can see you moving towards a valued goal. Okay, well, what's the implication of that? Better have a valued goal, because otherwise you can't get any positive motivation working out. And so the more valuable the goal, in principle, the more the micro processes associated with that goal start to take on a positive charge. And so what that means is, well, you get up in the morning and you're excited about the day, you're ready to go. And so as far as I can tell, what you do is you specify your long-term ideal. Maybe you also specify a place you want to stay the hell away from, so that you're terrified to fail as well as excited about succeeding, because that's also useful. You specify your goal. You do that in some sense as a unique individual. You want to specify goals that make you say, oh, if that could happen as a consequence of my efforts, it would clearly be worthwhile. Because the question always is, why do something? Because doing nothing is easy. You just sit there and you don't do anything. That's real easy. The question is, why would you ever do anything? And the answer to that has to be because you've determined by some means that it's worthwhile. And then the next question might be, well, where should you look for worthwhile things? And one would be, well, you could consult your own temperament. And the other would be, well, you kind of look at what it is that people accrue that's valuable across the lifespan. So you do a structural analysis of the subcomponents of human existence, and I already did that. You need a family, you need friends. Like, you don't need to have all these things, but you better have most of them. Family, friends, career, educational goals, plans for, time outside of work, attention to your mental and physical health, etc. That's what life is about. And if you don't have any of those things, well, then all you've got left is misery and suffering. So that's a bad deal for you. So once you set up that goal structure, let's say, and that's really in many ways that's what you should be doing at university. That's exactly what you should be doing, is trying to figure out who it is that you're trying to be, right? And you aim at that, and then you use everything you learn as a means of building that person that you want to be. And I really mean want to be. I don't mean should be, even those things are going to overlap. And it's important to distinguish between those, because that's partly, and this is back down to the micro-routine analysis. So if I was saying, well, you're going to try to make yourself more industrious. Okay, number one, specify your damn goals, because how are you going to hit something if you don't know what it is? That isn't going to happen. And often people won't specify their goals too, because they don't like to specify conditions for failure. So if you keep yourself all vague and foggy, which is real easy, because that's just a matter of not doing as well, then you don't know when you fail. And people might say, well, I really don't want to know when I fail because that's painful. So I'll keep myself blind about when I fail. That's fine, except you'll fail all the time then. You just won't know it until you've failed so badly that you're done. And that can easily happen by the time you're 40. So I would recommend that you don't let that happen. So that's willful blindness, right? You could have known, but you chose not to. Okay, so once you get your goal structure set up, you think, okay, if I could have this life, it looks like that might be worth living, despite the fact that it's going to be, anxiety provoking and threatening, and there's going to be some suffering and loss involved in all of that. Obviously, the goal is to have a vision for your life such that, all things considered, that justifies your effort. Okay, so then what do? Well, then you turn down to the micro-routines. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm aiming for. How does that instantiate itself day to day, week to week, month to month? And that's where something like a schedule can be unbelievably useful. Google Calendar. It's like, make a damn schedule and stick to it. Okay, so what's the rule with the schedule? It's not a bloody prison. That's the first thing that people do wrong. They say, well, I don't like to follow a schedule. Well, it's like, well, what kind of schedule are you setting up? Well, I have to do this, then I have to do this, then I have to do this, and then I just go play video games, because who wants to do all these things that I have to do? It's like, wrong. Set the damn schedule up so that you have the day you want. That's the trick. It's like, okay, I've got tomorrow. If I was going to set it up so it was the best possible day I could have, practically speaking, what would it look like? Well, then you schedule that. And obviously there's a bit of responsibility that's going to go along with that, because if you have any sense, one of the things that you're going to insist upon is that at the end of the day, you're not in worse shape than you were than at the beginning of the day, right? Because that's a stupid day. If you have a bunch of those in a row, you just dig yourself a hole and then you bury yourself in it. It's like, sorry, that's just not a good strategy. It's a bad strategy. So maybe 20% of your day has to be responsibility and obligation, or maybe it's more than that, depending on how far behind you are. But even that, you can ask yourself, okay, well, I've got these responsibilities. I have to schedule the damn things in. What's the right ratio of responsibility to reward? And you can ask yourself that, just like you'd negotiate with someone who is working for you. It's like, okay, you got to work tomorrow. Okay, so I want you to work tomorrow. And you might say, okay, well, what are you going to do for me that makes it likely that I'll work for you? Well, you could ask yourself that, So maybe you do an hour of responsibility and then you play a video game for 15 minutes. I don't know, whatever turns your crank, man. But, you have to negotiate with yourself and not tyrannize yourself. Like you're negotiating with someone that you care for, that you would like to be productive and have a good life. And that's how you make the schedule. It's like, and then you look at the day and you think, well, if I had that day, that'd be good. Great. And you're useless and horrible, so you'll probably only hit it with about 70% accuracy, but that beats the hell out of 0, right? And if you hit it even with 50% accuracy, another rule is, well, aim for 51% the next week, or 50.5% for God's sake, or because you're going to hit that position where things start to loop back positively and spiral you upward. And so that's one way that you can work on your conscientiousness, is plan a life you'd like to have. And you do that partly by referring to social norms. That's more or less rescuing your father from the belly of the whale. But the other way you do that is by having a little conversation with yourself about, as if you don't really know who you are, because you know what you're like. You won't do what you're told. You won't do what you tell yourself to do. You must have noticed that. It's like you're a bad employee and a worse boss. And both of those work, for you. You don't know what you want to do, and then when you tell yourself what to do, you don't do it anyways. You should fire yourself and find someone else to be. But the number of dominance hierarchies that human beings could produce started to multiply, right? Because there's all sorts of ways that you can be successful. You think about how many ways you can be successful in a modern culture, and you can be successful in dimensions that aren't really even associated with each other. So you can be successful socially, that's what an extrovert would do. You could be successful in terms of intimate relationships, that's what an agreeable person would do. A disagreeable person would be more successful with regards to competition. A person who's high in neuroticism would be trying to protect themselves and to establish some sort of security. An open person would be looking for a flexible, creative environment. And so there's this multiplicity of ways that you can establish a dominance hierarchy and be successful in it. And if you're creative, you can come up with your own damn dominance hierarchy, which is exactly what you're doing if you're creative, right? You spin up a game that's your game, and then you make the rules. And that's hard, because if you make a new game with new rules, it's hard to monetize it. But you could be the best at playing that game, and so that's a huge advantage to being creative if you can pull it off. So then you think, well, what's happened among human beings is the multiplication of the set of possible dominance hierarchies, so it's become very broad. And then you could say, well, what's driving selection now is the ability to be successful across multiple sets of dominance hierarchies. And that accounts, at least in part, for our cognitive flexibility. And so that's really what a human being is. A human being is a creature that has high potential for succeeding across a very wide range of potential human dominance hierarchies. And so that gives us our transformative psyche. That's the niche that we've both produced and occupy. And I think it's out of that hero mythology emerges fundamentally. Because I think what the hero is, the mythological hero, is a representation of that part of the psyche that's particularly good at being successful across sets of dominance hierarchies. It's a very, very biological way of thinking about it. And I've thought about this for a long time. I can't see any way that just can't be the case. I mean, how else could it work? If we had a fixed behavioral pattern like beavers, you're the most successful beaver if you build the best dam, it's like fine, then you know what's going to be selected for. But that isn't what people are like, and it's also why we're so multi-purpose, We have hands. What's a hand for? What's the evolutionary function of a hand? Well, you can't specify that. You could say it's something like, well, a hand is useful for doing a whole bunch of different things with. Well, and mouth, tongue, same thing. What are words for? Well, it's the same thing. They're for communicating a very wide range of information. It's something like that. So we're these weird general purpose animals. We're not great at any one thing, but we can swim better than most terrestrial animals. We can run faster than most animals, and we can certainly run longer. Like a human being can run a horse to death over the course of a week if they're in good shape. So we're really good at being a multi-purpose entity, like a rat, they call rats weedy species because they can be anywhere. They don't have a specific niche. There's animals down in the Amazon that they're specialized for one tree, or one type of tree in one tiny little area. That's not what human beings like, is we're we're like cockroaches or rats, which is a nasty comparison, but we can go anywhere and thrive. And so being particularly good at that, being particularly good at being able to go anywhere and thrive, also seems to me to be a canonical element of the hero mythology. One of the things that happens if you're higher in serotonin because you're more dominant is that you're more satiated all the time. That's why people who are low in the dominance hierarchy with decreased levels of serotonin are more impulsive and also more emotionally dysregulated. They're more impulsive because, hey, you take your positive thing when you can get it. And so they're more dissatisfied. They're more looking for anything that will produce a positive outcome. And then they're also more likely to experience diffuse negative emotion, partly because their serotonin systems are lower, indicating their tenuous status in the dominance hierarchy, meaning that everything they do that's uncertain is far more dangerous. So this is also why it's very difficult often when you're trying to treat someone who's depressed, because you could say there's not much difference between being depressed and existing in the biochemical state that being at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy would produce. In fact, they're the same thing. Well, then the question is, are you depressed or are you just at the bottom of a dominance hierarchy? Because those are not, like the symptomatology is very, very similar, but the cause and the cure are not the same. You know, because you might be at the bottom of a dominance hierarchy because you're just, everything about your life is ruined. So, and of course you're suffering. Are you depressed? So, no, not exactly. You just have nowhere to go. What happens is that the males obviously are selected for their ability to move up dominance hierarchies. Obviously, because the ones that are at the top of the dominance hierarchy reproduce preferentially. And so that means the male dominance hierarchy becomes a method of selection. But then allied with that is the female proclivity for choice on whatever dimension the dominance hierarchy happens to be arranged. And so then female sexual selection also becomes a radical, non-random selector of what genetic material is going to move into the next generation. And so I fail to see how any of that can be separated from the emergence of complex nervous systems and mind over the course of evolution, because creatures aren't making random choices. They're not random at all. So we even know such things like, imagine a peacock's tail, you know. It's covered with eyes, which is quite interesting because eyes, of course, attract attention. And lots of animals have evolved eye-like markings. Like moths, there's moths that when they unfold their wings, they have two big eyes on the back of them. And that's to keep birds from eating them, right? Because the birds don't like being stared at, so they stay away from the moths. But so a peacock's tail is nothing but eyes. And so it's very attractive and it shimmers. And there's something about it that's beautiful, which is quite interesting too. The females have obviously been selecting the male peacocks for beauty. They have this insane tail. Well, so the evolutionary biologists have thought, well, what possible utility could that tail be? Is it just maybe the females got fixated on tail, so to speak, and you know, you got a Baldwin effect loop going there, and the male peacocks just got bigger and bigger tails, and it's just like an evolutionary dead end. It's, you know, it's a positive feedback system that's gone out of control. But they have done things that like look at the symmetry and breadth, say, or the symmetry and size and overall quality of the male peacock's tail as a marker for physical health. So reduced parasite load, for example. And it does turn out that the healthier male peacocks have better tail display. And so what the females seem to be doing is using some marker or some set of markers as a proxy indicator for health. And I think you could say reasonably that female human beings do the same thing to male human beings. And there's some of that vice versa too. Like we evaluate each other, for example, for symmetry, which is one of the elements of beauty, because healthier people tend to be more symmetrical. And lots of animals use symmetry. Butterflies, if butterflies won't mate with another butterfly if it deviates from symmetry by the tiniest amounts you can imagine. So symmetry is a marker, and there's other markers like shoulder width to waist width is one, and waist width to hip width is another. That's usually what males use that to evaluate females in part. So there's lots of markers of health. But it also looks to me like the data worldwide seems to indicate that women, so imagine that women mate across dominance hierarchies and up, socioeconomically speaking. And on average, across cultures, women go for men who are about 4 to 5 years older. You know, it varies. In the Scandinavian countries, that's shrunk a little bit, but not that much. And in other cultures, it's bigger. I would say that depends to some degree on difficulty of establishing economic independence, right? Because in richer countries, it's easier to have enough economic independence if you're a male to be a useful participant in the process of having children. But it doesn't matter, cross-culturally, it's still across and up, where men mate across and down. They don't care much about socioeconomic status. It doesn't seem to be part of their selection method, generally speaking. So I think that part of that is also the ability of women to select for male health. It's something like that, because it isn't only that, because if you're healthy and energetic, you're much more likely to be successful, because it's very hard to be successful if you're ill, obviously. I mean, so, because the competition is just too high. And both genders, both sexes select each other for attractiveness, both select for intelligence, both select for personality, although there are differences there in terms of what's stressed. But, so I think you can derive a couple of things out of this, and this is where I think people are different than other animals, importantly different, is that, so you imagine that there's tremendous selection pressure towards the production, let's say, of men who are good at climbing male dominance hierarchies, or climbing the male dominance hierarchy. But the thing that's so interesting about people is that we've multiplied our dominance hierarchies. You know, if you take an animal that's got a rather static behavioral pattern, then there's a single hierarchy. Elephant seals are a good example of that. So elephant seals, the males are absolutely massive. They're way, way bigger than the females. And they basically have harems, roughly speaking. And they use physical prowess as their marker of status, essentially. And obviously size is a huge part of that, because otherwise the male elephant seals wouldn't be as... They're massive, these things. They're absolutely enormous. And so it's just power / health, you know, maybe aggression, something like that. It's whatever makes them more suitable for the kind of physical combat that elephant seals engage in. So, and the degree to which power is associated with dominance status in those sorts of situations seems to be associated with the size differential between males and females. So the more power is an issue with regards to male competence, the larger the males are compared to the females, and the more likely the males are going to have a harem relationship with the females. And you see that a little bit in human beings, because men are bigger than women. They're not overwhelmingly bigger, that's sexual dimorphism. And you know, there's some men that are smaller than some women, but on average men are taller and they have more upper body strength and so forth. So there is a power element to male competition, but it's not as extended as it would be among animals, say like elephant seals. So in the elephant seal, you see maybe there's one stable set of traits that's being selected for that makes the males more likely to reproduce. But human beings, we're very weird creatures because we're so conceptually flexible. And so what seems to have happened, maybe males started selecting each other in dominance competitions for something like cognitive flexibility and conscientiousness. It's something like that. So that would be the ability to abstractly represent the world, and then the ability to operate effectively within it, to represent yourself socially in a way, and then to carry through with that, because that enables people to trust you. So it's something like that. And so that produced cortical expansion, and then women were selecting men who were good at that, and that produced cortical expansion. And then there's an arms race between women and men with regards to intelligence. So the women kept up, or they certainly kept up with intelligence as the evolutionary cycle continued. Sexual selection is no joke. It could be the primary thing. It's certainly one of the primary things that's driven human evolution.